think it's a nice prop. And Booty Basket is pointing at me. So I'll take...
Sick.
Oh no.
That's awesome.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Nordic Sound Channel. As always, I am your host, Jameson Foster, and today we have a very dear friend of mine, Chris Welsh, joining us all the way from North Carolina. He's in Colorado for a couple weeks. We're going to be shipping off to Cascadian Midsummer tomorrow, actually. So whenever this video comes up, we will have already been there and had a great time. I'm sure of it. Yeah. So Chris, most of you might know him from Sun and Moondance. If you don't know him from his pollution cleanup project, he also does. But musically, he is of Sun and Moondance, whom many of you might be familiar with, most known for his album Heima. But my personal favorite, his newer, more traditional side, is Bleemen Mai Til Dansen and Shugehesten. And as I mentioned, he also runs the Clean Sacred Lands Project in North Carolina, where you dedicate quite a bit of time, blood, sweat, and tears into cleaning up the incredibly polluted Western North Carolina area. So Chris, welcome. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing good. Super excited to be in Colorado.
Yep. Been here for 2 weeks already.
Yeah, had a blast. The wilderness out here is amazing. Enjoyed the hiking, just hanging out with Scuzzlebutt.
Hey, now this is about you. But yeah, so Chris, not only is this the first interview I've done in person since Nick way back in November, you were the first person I've ever interviewed in my own home. So welcome.
Thank you.
It's actually kind of weird doing this in my home, but it's all good. So Chris, you were also probably, except for Will from Viavaki, one of the first Americans that I've interviewed on the Nordic Sound Channel. And the reason I love talking to Americans so much is because, especially those who have successfully made music and made names for yourselves, is because Americans have a bit of a reputation when it comes to Americans who are really into Nordic stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And so with that in mind, that you are a primarily Nordic influenced or Nordic inspired American musician, I would love to know sort of how you got bit with that Nordic bug in the first place. Like, what is your origin story for, if not music in general, like just how you got eventually into that Nordic thing?
How I got bit with the Nordic bug. I think most people, myself included,
there's no judgment here.
Vardruna.
Yeah. I've got the tattoo. I've got the flag flying somewhere. Yeah.
I got the tattoo as well.
Yep.
This is very, big influence in the music, but especially when I first started. So I guess how I got into the Nordic music was through Vardruna. And
when was that? When you got into Vardruna?
Well, that was many years ago.
Because I know you were quite the MySpace hound.
Yeah, it was right after the first album came out.
Okay.
It was it may be a couple years after that first album came out. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as a lot of us Americans, we I heard the Tagerharpa for the first time, and that was kind of my introduction into it. The Tagerharpa was not my first instrument.
Yep.
Actually, Sun and Moondance started with the mountain dulcimer. That was...
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, Sun and Moondance started with the Appalachian dulcimer.
Do you want to explain what that is real quick?
Yeah, so the Appalachian dulcimer is in the zither family. So it's... I don't know how to just describe it other than it's like somewhat of a lap guitar, except it's not chromatic. Mm-hmm. It's it's in a different mode, and it's made to play songs. It's made to build songs off of. I guess the Norwegian instrument that is very much similar to the mountain dulcimer is the langeleik, which differs in that the langeleik has one melody string and 8 drone strings that you play, whereas the mountain dulcimer you have more chords that you can play. Mm-hmm. But it's strummed on a side pattern, and you create your notes on the. You have two melody strings that are tuned the exact same, and
like a mandolin.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
I've always noticed it's funny that like I can kind of see it's kind of like a Frankenstein of Appalachian instruments with like the mandolin string being the melody string and then the others are guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's funny is that actually it uses banjo strings.
It does.
Mountain Dulcimer uses banjo strings. Yep.
Awesome. Well, now I relate to it a little bit more.
Yeah. And they also make an actual Mountain Dulcimer that has like a banjo backing to it.
I need this.
It's a pretty cool instrument. But yeah, the Mountain Dulcimer was the first instrument that I picked up after, because I had a history of being in band when I was in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
So I played clarinet, and then I learned to play the French horn. So I had like woodwind and brass.
You need to bring it back. You need to bring the French horn back.
Well, that's the buka horn.
It is, yes. I guess we will get to that. I shouldn't put the cart before the horse. Yeah.
Yeah. So it started out with the dulcimer, and my friend just let me borrow it while he went to the store, and I was sitting there and I started playing. I was like, oh my god, this instrument makes sense, because I went years without
mm-hmm.
playing music. I would sing,
mm-hmm.
but that was kind of the extent of my music, because I was very shy.
Yep.
I didn't want to perform in front of people,
mm-hmm.
So I quit playing band.
Yep.
And focused on singing to myself.
Band.
Yeah. Focused on singing to myself, and some 8-9 years later, maybe more than that,
mm-hmm.
Mountain Dulcimer was kind of it. And then I learned about tagelharpa, and that's where the fascination with Scandinavian instruments came, because I learned about the buka horn.
Mm-hmm.
But the interest wasn't like there in playing those instruments at that point. It was like, whoa, these instruments exist. I really like the sound of them, because I had just started playing the Mountain Dulcimer again.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I don't even think I had my tagelharpa when I released the first demo that I did, and that was 2014. So I think it was either 2014 or 2015 where I got my first tagelharpa, and then it just became, okay, what are these other instruments? I love their sound, and so once I figured out how what they were, it's like, okay, now where do I get them?
Yeah.
So it's like that's the tricky part, is like when I was first getting into it, now we have tagelharpas everywhere. You can find them on Etsy.
Mark my words, they will be in Guitar Center by the end of the decade.
They wouldn't surprise me.
Wouldn't surprise me either.
Yeah. But finding the makers was kind of like the hardest thing, because they just the kind of revolution of Nordic music
mm-hmm.
It was like I was at I won't say the forefront of that, but I was like near the beginning when that resurgence was starting to happen.
You were there.
Yeah,
you were there.
I was there, and so there was at that time there was only like one, maybe two people that made tagelharpas on Etsy,
mm-hmm.
and I remember buying the first one, and it was shit.
Yeah.
And
yep.
The second one, it was better, but so tagelharpa, and then I think the next one after that was the buka horn,
mm-hmm.
and Magnar Storbeken
mm-hmm.
was who made my buka horn, and I guess after doing the buka horn, the Kravik Lira
mm-hmm.
Came into play. Michael J. King made my Kravik Lira.
Yep.
And I was at that point, I was still very much focused on kind of like what we call the dark folk,
mm-hmm. Yep.
Kind of the Vardruna, very ceremonial type stuff. And then it wasn't all that long ago. Well, I won't say that. It was a good six years, because I was listening to Vardruna was kind of the starting point of the Nordic music journey, mm-hmm. and then I went a step further and started listening to the more traditional
mm-hmm.
music, and I just absolutely fell in love with the Hardingfele.
Yep.
Fell in love with the Langalike, and just all these other instruments that I was finding through Scandinavia. So I'm like, I want to play these.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all I would listen to is Scandinavian music, and that's all my brain really knows is Scandinavian music.
Yep.
A little bit of bluegrass, but
yeah, I was about to say, like, if you're from North Carolina, you
yeah.
have to, like, just intrinsically have some kind of Appalachian string band music just hidden somewhere back there, like, reactivates, like, you're a sleeper agent whenever it comes up.
Yeah, but I can guarantee you, if I was to, like, sit down and, like, start singing some kind of bluegrass or playing, there would be some kind of, like, Nordic flair.
It would just
in
be
there because it's just how my brain works. I don't know any different.
Awesome.
I've listened to it so long.
You just dedicated yourself to it so much that you've become it.
That's pretty much what happened. Honestly.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's kind of the dream for Americans who get into it, is you want it to sort of, like, get so woven into you that you can just play it without, and you can sort of, like, pass off, especially with Bli Med Mind Til Dansen. There are a lot of tracks and it's like, is this guy Norwegian? Like, you sort of, like, understand the nuances of it a lot more, and I think that's a result of how much time you've spent just, like, listening and playing and all of that. And so I'm assuming that. So it's funny, because you say you're shy, right? I know you're shy, but you say you're shy, but then you talk about sort of, like, cold calling or cold emailing these Scandinavians to, like, make instruments for you. And so I'm just assuming that the way that you got into playing Nordic music and how you got actually kind of ingrained into the community yourself was through asking around for instruments and stuff like that. Because for anyone who doesn't know, I forgot to mention this at the top, Chris has collaborated with quite a few Nordic musicians. Runehild, who is very known on this channel, Robert Sant, and Tira from Agdir. And were there any more that I'm... Oh, and Kati Ram. So you've collaborated with quite a few, and you've become, a part of the community in some ways, in a way that a lot of Americans don't when they're into it. So sort of like, is that how you also got to know people, was sort of like just early on talking to these instrument makers and getting involved in these little communities, or was that a whole separate adventure?
It was kind of separate in a sense, yeah. So how I got to do a track with Runa was basically, like, Runa was a very big influence, like, back in the MySpace days.
Oh, I know.
You talked about that.
I'm so happy that you're going to be telling your MySpace Runa. Like, you get to be such a hipster about Runehild that it's like, Grimfrost Records. I remember MySpace. So please, please tell everyone your really early on, like, garage daily experience with Runehild.
Yeah, like, I followed Runa's music for a long time because I saw what Runa was doing. I didn't want to be the person who made music that they had no idea what they're even talking about or haven't lived the experience.
You've got plenty of that.
Yeah, I was going to be, writing about nature, writing about runes, about, like, animistic ways. And I wanted to do that. So I created my life around that. So I started working on a farm.
Yep.
Like, I worked on a farm. And I'd probably be lying if I say Runa didn't have an impact leading me to that point, because I saw just how authentic and how true to the music and to the lifestyle Runa was. And so that was just a big inspiration for me. It's like, I want to be true to my music. I want this to reflect me on a very personal and spiritual level.
Yep.
So when the first song I ever wrote on the Mountain Dulcimer is a Hymne til Freya, and that's on the demo. It's also on Song to the Sun. But so when I did this first track, I was like, it's just the Mountain Dulcimer. So I would love to have the Hardingfella on the track, and so the first person that came to my mind was Runa, and Jennifer was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." And what was funny is I didn't even know how to tune at that point in time.
I remember you telling me that.
I sent her the track, and I was like, I don't even remember what it was tuned to, but I was like, it's not quite this, it's in between this, and it was just like, it was nowhere on the tuner. It was just kind of like in the middle. I haven't, like, gone back and, like, looked at what the actual hertz was, but
I love you so much.
It would be fantastic if it was, like, surprisingly, like, 432 hertz or
I know,
whatever. But yeah, so that was really a good feeling to have my big inspirations in music be on the first song that I ever produced, and that track has a really special place in my heart.
Yeah,
and,
understandable why.
Yeah,
it's funny. It's like, when you tell me about the tuning thing, you're kind of taking me back to two memories. First is like when I first started playing electric bass, way back in middle school. One of the tunes I really wanted to learn was Megadeth's "Peace Sells, But Who's Buying," and I remember I looked up the tabs back in the day, and the tab that was the most highest rated on the website said that you tune the bass a quarter step down, which isn't a thing. But me, in middle school, I'm like, okay, how do I do that? And I'm putting it in the red space between an E and an E flat on a tuner. And I'm looking back at that now, it's no, the guy who wrote the tab is an idiot. You didn't know. No, Megadeth doesn't tune to a quarter step down. It was the funniest thing. But then also you remind me of your crust punk days.
Yeah.
That sounded very crust punk of you to just tuning. What's that?
Sun and Moon Dance is a very punk rock group.
We don't do that hi-fi bullshit. We don't tune. That's what posters do. And so we're just going to cut in here for 1 second because I know the feeling. Chris wanted to make sure that he mentioned some very important people on his journey for instrument making. So
To the people that I've definitely become very good friends with and love very dearly. I have been my friend from Sweden, Robert Sant. He's just an amazing musician who him and I found each other through different sigil work that I've done, and we realized we're pulling from the same well here. And he invited me to do some tracks with him, and he pulled out the best material, some of the best material that I've ever done.
Awesome.
Just from his, the music that he sent me, and we were just so on the same wavelength that he's just a person that I consider a brother from another mother.
Awesome, yeah. And also just to promote him further, he just put out a new track with Benny from Folkebort
Yes.
Vinden. I love it. It's so Steve Von Till, and this channel is sick and tired of me falling over Steve Von Till. But it's such a good track. And then he recently finished recording an album at Astral Synergy. I forget which one's the which with Gustav, but he just finished recording an album, so it's gonna be great to hear. Two albums. He recorded two albums
at the same time.
Jesus Christ, I gotta get on it. All right. And then the other Tira
Bengtsson, Norway. And Tira's been so supportive of me and my music, and I just have such adoration for that human being. She sends me funny shit all the time.
She does.
I'm just
you showed me the wandering strawberries last night.
Yeah. So I thank Tira for giving me all of the crazy Norwegian commercials that I would never ever see.
Is she the one that showed you the Freya chocolate one of the guy kicking the girl in the face doing the howling? Oh my god. All right, Tira, thank you for that. That made my week.
Yep. Tira, awesome.
And as are you, Robert. Oh, that is great. And so so before we get further into your music, how it's grown over time, sort of just as a teaser, how you've become, at least something that I admire, is how you sort of started in that dark folk era. But rather than caging yourself into that, you've let that sort of lead you down a very genuine passion for traditional Nordic music too. And that is, long story short, the one of the main goals of this channel too, is to get people to sort of be more curious about where the music we listen to comes from. But before we get to all of that, you briefly mentioned spirituality and animism and stuff like that. You live in a very beautiful part of the world. You, especially one of my favorite things you've ever said to me was, I sort of noted how North Carolina has a really surprisingly massive neo-pagan community, particularly of Nordic neo-pagan. Maybe not massive, I don't want to oversell it, but nine times out of 10 when someone from an American neo-pagan community friends me on Facebook, they're from North Carolina. So it's just a way higher rate. And when I asked you about that, you just said those mountains hold a lot of wisdom.
Yeah, they do.
And I love that answer because it kind of encapsulates the way that you think about wisdom and spirituality and knowledge as coming from the land. You were a very land-based human being. And so I guess what I want, even if it wasn't there at the beginning, eventually your fascination with Nordic stuff has also wrapped up in your ideas of spirituality. And the way that you now lead your life to the point where you do spend a lot of time cleaning up pollution and litter from the area around where you live. So just if you have anything you want to say about like sort of like the spirituality side of, you know, the whole Nordic music scene and how that's sort of like gotten tangled and interwoven into your life, I'd love to hear more about how the Nordic side of things influenced you in that way.
Yeah, so especially in the very early days of Sun and Moon Dance, I was what I would have called a practicing, you know, Norse neo-pagan, mm-hmm. or heathen, mm-hmm. whatever you want to call it.
Whatever flavor you prefer.
Whatever flavor you want to call it. That was very... But the thing was that I never really wrote songs. No, that's a lie. I do have a EP that was dedicated to Freya.
Okay.
Which I always forget about that one. I always forget about it.
We'll bring it back. We'll do a remaster or something like that.
But no, so yeah, definitely early on for the first, up until the release of Gnumbagaldur, I was identifying and practicing as a Norse pagan. Now, my approach to Norse paganism wasn't really a traditional one. Mm-hmm. That I never was really called to any of the goddesses. I did, you know, Thor for a while. Mm-hmm. You know, it was kind of like the archetype that I lived up to.
Me and Thor had a thing.
Yeah, Thor had a thing. Yeah. But I was more in tune with the more animistic side of it, mm-hmm. with, you know, the spirits of the land.
Yep.
Runes, really diving deep into wanting to learn the runes from a very natural mm-hmm. point, like perspective, and that was going out working on the farm and being surrounded by mm-hmm. runes at all times.
Yep.
And yeah, so farming was definitely a thing that got me my hands in the dirt. It got me working how to like work with the land, how to tend to it, how to grow things, how to take care of animals.
Yep.
Just being a steward to the land. And I think that's an important part that a lot of people who are in the like Norse pagan community leave out. They're so focused on the gods that I feel like the more important part is tending to the land, tending to the spirits.
And just so you know that you're not sort of like talking out your ass or like making this problem up. My very first year at Midgard's Blow 2022, there was such a massive pile of litter around the bonfire in the morning, like after the first night, that Einar opened up the Vargurna set with sort of like finger wagging, being like, this is a really sacred, really important place. And so if you're here, I'm very paraphrasing. This is like 2 years ago, mm-hmm. and I wasn't entirely sober when he was doing this. So I was wasting all my money on $15 beers at Midgard's Blow. But so I just remember that he was pretty much like, this is a sacred place. If you come here because you claim to, you know, have the spiritual connection to it, then essentially do better and respect this place. And, you know, they take their performances very seriously. So for him to have like broken that fourth wall to say that meant that it was very important to him to say. And last year, I got up the first morning, and because I remembered that lecture from him, I got up and like at 6 a.m, me and the security guy were just picking up beer cans. Same thing happened. So the only reason I'm lending that anecdote is just because, you know, a lot of times when we sort of like raise our fist to the sky, we can feel like the old man yelling at the clouds about the problem that doesn't really exist. But no, it's 100% a problem that, you know, the idealistic spirituality doesn't often translate into good practice when it comes to that. And that's why I love talking to you about this stuff, because
it becomes a plastic identity.
Very plastic identity. Not that I'm perfect, not that I'm not a hypocrite in some ways, as anyone would be.
It's like we all have.
Yeah, exactly. But like the other reason I love talking to you about this stuff is so like early on, when I was a cringe lord and getting into like Nordic spirituality and stuff like that, the one weird thing was like when I was getting into it is I never actually felt that interested in gods either. And this is why I love talking to you about this stuff, because I feel like you're one of the few people who relate. I was never one of those guys to like hold up a drinking horn and be like, "Hail Odin!" Like, this has never been my thing. If it is your thing, you know, that perfectly fine. But to me, it's always been more about just like where we live and like, you know, those little spirits. That's why I love trolls so much. Is I feel like that's more of what I'm into. Never felt so connected to like the anthropomorphized gods or anything like that, and always felt way more connected to the sides of that spirituality that is more like, hey, the land that we're on is sacred. And so and even to the point actually where, you know, back in the day you can really only talk about this stuff on forums or something like that, and I actually remember way back in the day asking on that godforsaken subreddit about like pagans that like don't really fully believe in gods, and like my wording could have been better, but when I was all trying to say was like pagan, but like the gods aren't that important to me, everyone was like, "You're an atheist, idiot." And I was like, I don't, but everyone told me you're an atheist, bro. And I'm sitting here like, well, that doesn't help because I'm not, right? Like, but that's to the degree to which you're also people like this are also outliers, where at least back in the day, if you were to even mention gods aren't really what calls me to this, people like, you're just an atheist that likes plants. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or an atheist likes farming.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's still like this. This was like 10 years ago, but I hope it's gotten better from that. But definitely where the gods are a big part of it, and it's nice to relate to someone who also is like, it's kind of made me go farming instead.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess so back to the question where spirituality I was talking about, you know, Gnúngaðr there was definitely, and it was probably noticeable for a lot of people, there was a shift when Gnúngaðr was released. That was my final album that pretty much had anything to do with Norse paganism.
Okay.
Now, there were, you know, it will always have Scandinavian undertones. There will always be that subtle, you know, like spiritual undertone with Nordic paganism in a sense.
Yep.
But after Gnúngaðr, that I took my hammer off.
Yep.
I just could not identify in that path anymore, because I was seeing things in a very different light at that point in time. And so Sun and Moon Dance has always been healing music. Now, that was not the intention I had whenever I first started writing. The Sun and Moon Dance was always me, my personal stories, things that I had experienced. What I realized early on was that I was writing music to get me through hard times that I was going through.
Yep.
So every single album was dealing with something that I had been through. It was the first demo, you know, actually was like during this like breakup that I was going through. And then like the album Songs of the Sun, which is a very, very important song to me. That is probably one of the reasons I'm still here.
Yep.
Losing a partner to cancer, and that album was like, I felt like she wrote that album through me so that I would not just give up on life, because I was not writing beautiful music at that point in life. Like I was writing dark folk music.
Yep. And
yet these songs that were coming out were the most beautiful songs that I've ever done. And it's like, this should not be what I'm writing. I'm sad as fuck right now.
Yeah.
Like, but I just felt that was the way that I was going to heal. And once I released that album, I felt very clean through it. And so that's when I was realizing that the songs that I was doing were actually like affecting people. I would have people like message me in like the personal messages. I hate using the term DM. It's not just not going to use that word.
Especially as a dungeon master, I get confused.
But I would just get random messages from people. It's be like, "You saved me from myself tonight," and that hits me hard. It's like, wow, the music that I'm doing, is doing something for me,
Mm-hmm.
but it's actually helping somebody else who was dealing with some dark stuff in their life.
Mm-hmm.
That it made them change their mind, that maybe not taking their life,
Mm-hmm.
and it had that's happened multiple times where it's been like, your music got me through some really hard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And as the albums progressed, especially after getting the Galder, the idea of medicinal music became kind of the forefront, and so every album pretty much since then, except for the traditional ones,
Mm-hmm.
Was geared towards, it had a theme, and it was tuned to a specific part of the body that it was meant to heal. Because that's when I started really learning about sound healing and how notes correlate with the body, because it was so fascinating that I would sit and I would listen to music. I would find the bass note, I would feel where I've felt it in my body, not knowing anything about what the correlation was. 100% of the time, it's exactly where I felt it. It's like, oh, there's something here.
Yep.
So that really just got me very interested in what's the word? Come on, words. Intentionally making music for healing purpose. So as the music was beginning, it was kind of about me and my experiences, and it still is to an extent today, but it's more so it became for other people, and for kind of a purpose, I guess.
Yeah.
And
well, thanks for. And it's not easy to talk about, but thanks for sharing that. That's very important, especially because I think I was telling you about the fiddler Knut Hamre. I told you about him maybe at the Golden Midsummer Festival. This very prominent Norwegian fiddler who used to get calls in the middle of the night from people who sounded sick, who just wanted him to play over the phone, and when he was done, they would just say thank you and hang up. It's just such a music all over the world has always had this music, or music all over the world has had this musical property. No, music all over the world has had this healing property.
It absolutely has.
And it's even right there in the Scandinavian stuff, for sure. And I also see why you and Runehild connect so much, because she's also very much into that intentional healing through music. It's very much a big part of what she does.
I get the cool thing about that is as our separate entities, Runa's project and my project, I couldn't help but smile just seeing the progression that we followed the exact same path. And I was just
kindred spirits.
Yeah.
Kindred spirits. Yeah. Definitely. I see it.
Yeah. Even though I've never met Runa in person, she's a person I consider a dear friend.
Yeah. She has that effect on people.
Yeah. Very special human being.
Hi, Runa, if you're watching.
Oh yeah, the camera's over here.
Hello, listener questions.
Listener questions, yeah.
I'm good. I broke the fourth wall. That's the thing you never do on a podcast. But no, so it's really it's really important that, and I'm glad you feel comfortable enough to sort of talk about that sort of stuff. Because it is important, and I can definitely tell it's a big part of how you've approached music throughout your whole canon or your oeuvre of music. Now with Hema, which is probably your most, I think that's it's either your most popular, it's definitely your most listened to on Spotify.
Yeah.
Your top 5 list of most popular songs, most of them are from Hema. If I'm remembering correctly.
Spotify algorithms.
Yeah, I know, right? So, you love them and you hate them, and you just take it as it comes.
Take it as it comes.
Yep.
Yeah.
But so I'm assuming that a lot of people are listening to this, that it's because they're familiar with this album as well. And I'm sort of curious. Hema always, at least to me, from an outsider looking in, and even though we're friends, I've never really asked you that in depth. I've sort of been saving all my questions for this, so they're more genuine. Hema always seemed to me like the whole idea of land-based spirituality being applied to your literal home of North Carolina.
Absolutely.
So do you want to talk a little bit more about how in Hema this idea of healing music, but also land connectivity is being, did you conscientiously choose one or the other? Do you think it sort of like naturally came into the music? I just want to hear more about how you approached using an explicitly Nordic sound palette and also, words to communicate the love that you feel for your Heima.
Yeah. Heima that was written on the first farm that I ever worked at. And it was after I got my Kravik Lyra, because the album is pretty much solely Kravik Lyra, except for the Buchahorn. I'll get into the Buchahorn a little bit. But yeah, so I just wanted to take all the natural things that I was experiencing on this farm, because I just found this deep love for the mountains and nature. Because when I came to that farm, I was just a punk rock kid that didn't know shit about anything. Like, I didn't. And it's funny because I almost...
You're not alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone.
Yeah. I was like, I just didn't know anything about anything. And like, my old boss would say the same thing.
You don't know anything about anything. Yeah. I'll hire you.
I was just a naive kid, you know? And, but farming is what grew me up. And it's what taught me, how to be a steward to the land and how to tend to living things. And so all those songs were just ways, because when I first started, I didn't have a lot of lyrics to my music. It was mostly all instrumental, and the idea was I want the music to tell the story. And so I was just like, okay, I want a song about this aspect. What does that feel like on the lyre? And thus a song was born. And I remember that one actually featured a poem that I had written, and it actually talks about a lot of like the different animals and like how I relate to the weather, to the fog and like the elves, various spirits in nature. So and it's actually the song Heima Part 1, and that was just a way to capture all those energies of what I was experiencing into the music. And that was also right after I got the Buchahorn from Magnar Storbecken. Rest in peace, Magnar Storbecken. Very much missed.
Yep.
So when I got the Buchahorn, I kind of have a funny story about the Buchahorn.
Lay it on us.
So when I was in first communication with Magnar, I was looking for a Buchahorn, and he's like, "Oh, I've got this one," and he's like, "It'd be fantastic for you," because it was when the election was going on.
Okay.
And when I first got it, he had named that Buchahorn Trump Eater.
Trump Eater.
Trump Eater. I was like,
beautiful.
Fucking love it. But
you're gonna have to bring that thing back out again pretty soon.
Yeah. Yep. So so being in band, when I played French horn, that was probably the only way I could have even like made a noise out of that Buchahorn, because a Buchahorn requires a lot of air, and it requires a very tight embouchure. And I was like, I'm not playing this down here. I'm going to go up to one of the cabins where I'm far away from people.
Yep.
And I'm just going to try to play. So I went up there, made all kinds of crazy, horrendous noises, played for about an hour, came back down to the farm. My boss at the time, he's like, the funniest thing happened. He's like, I heard this god-awful noise.
I know where this is going.
And the cows in the pasture were going crazy. They said they didn't know what to do. I was like, oh shit. So the thing about the Buchahorn is that there's this term that I heard a luthier refer to as fey sounds. Fey being cattle. And Buchahorn operating on the same kind of frequencies as the fey sound. Cooling operates on that. And it's like this sound wave, this specific tone that animals just resonate with. And I think the human too. I think it's just a living organisms. God, words are sucking.
Have frequencies or
Yeah.
have yep.
Yeah, and I think it's just a resonance that we all just like tune into.
Words are sucking. I need to interview more North Carolinians on this.
Our banjo mouth.
Your banjo mouth, but also your lovely way you got. Like when you on the farm, it grew me up. I was like, I love it. Like, it grew me up. I've never heard. Oh, anyway, I could fawn over the Appalachianisms all day, but keeping this focus a little more.
Yeah.
Like, I love that you're telling me that story about the Book of Horn. That reminds me immediately of when I had Amelia Lorenzen on when she had her EP come out, where she does a cooling of some sort. It cannot. Hadrivim, I think, is the name of that. Yep, cool. Thank you for checking me on that. She said that when she was first trying to figure out, like, am I doing it right? She was like, well, I'm asking people.
Yeah,
I should
speak to the animals.
Yeah, so she went to and she started doing it, and all of the sheep, like, almost like she was in a horror movie and they were predators, like, all go. And just all she sees is them start to run after her, and she was like, well, that's the best feedback I could get.
Yeah.
And it's hysterical to me how those are pretty much the same story.
Yeah, because once I got better, I went out, to a field. This was after I moved farms, and I was like, we had cows and horses there, and they were all super attentive.
Yep.
They was like, what is this? Because playing Buchhorn does put you in a different space. It has such a longing sound, and it's just like a very emotional frequency. And I feel like it's a very similar frequency that, certain times when I hit a certain note, I'll start to actually tear up.
Yep.
It's like, whoa. But yeah, that's kind of the story of Haima. It is a reflection of my love for the mountains and what I was learning doing farming.
Yep. I mean, that album was just really inspiring to me too as a musician. Just the way that you took, we already talked about how we're pretty much on the same page with how we view spirituality in that sort of through that pagan point of view. And so seeing how a fellow American was using Nordic stuff sort of as a jumping off point, as sort of a tool of how to look at the land you're on and then how to write music for it and how to honor it and stuff like that. So that was just something where, as a neighbor of yours, it's sort of interesting. It was just really cool to me to see how you were sort of fusing that American and Nordic thing into into one coherent sound, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it just came through as very genuine in the album too, and I'm sure many people listening would agree with me if I said it was a very powerful album. You can definitely feel the love for North Carolina coming through it.
Yeah.
And so I as I was sort of talking to you earlier before we started recording, it's Haima to me is sort of the metaphor for your dark folk days, right? And so you then eventually move into your Blieben bei till Dansen stage, right? Where you sort of, as you explore dark folk, and then as you personally are taking this journey from the more explicit gods side of paganism, it's becoming more of a land-based thing. And I sort of see them as one of the same when you're moving from dark folk to more traditional folk. Because to me, I do think dark folk has more of a preoccupation with, the more explicitly pagan, pantheon or gods or anything like that. And traditional music is that much more soft-spoken. It's more intrinsic in the music. I've talked about this on the channel. Not enough, but more than enough at the same time. So you eventually make this turn to Blieben bei till Dansen, which is just very traditional or neo-traditional. It's got a healthy mix of both. What was that like for you, moving from one sound that you've been comfortable with into exploring the more traditional side of thing? I guess if I could start with one simple question, because I never know where to go with you, because there's so much I want to pick your brain about. When you first wanted to get into the traditional stuff, how did you go about it? I know that's a loaded question.
Basically just diving into pretty much the traditional artists, the old vinyls.
Yep.
Those old black and white, scratchy, showcasing one instrument. lots of Hardanger fiddle albums. Let's see, I had Eilif Gunderson. He had a album just like Bukahorn, Nevelur albums, and I was just like, I really love these really intimate sound, like these intimate albums that are just showcasing like one, maybe two instruments.
Yep.
Getting into the traditional singers, and that's when I started realizing like, these have very specific meters to them. They have unique accents that I'm just fascinated with. And so the jump from the dark folk to the traditional it was kind of like I almost took a half step back.
Yeah.
Because if you listen to like Songs of the Sun, which is the mountain dulcimer, it's very somewhat traditional mountain music sounding songs.
Yep.
And so as I made more albums into the dark folk stuff, they got deeper and deeper, a lot more layers, a lot more intention behind it. And actually, there's a lot of improv that went into majority improv when it came to those songs on those three more dark folk albums, like Gnuma Galder, and then Spirit Walker, and then Remember. Those mostly improv. Now, when it comes to playing traditional music, I do sit down there and just play. I write songs for traditional, and so I've had kind of like this collection of songs that kind of built up throughout the years. Some very simple that had never been recorded, and so there's actually Shiga Heston was the most kind of latest one. There's like a song on there that I had like back in 2015, just never got recorded. So it was kind of like I took a kind of a step back in a sense. I really wanted to because the Scandinavian music was such a prominent undertone, especially when it came to like Gnuma Galder, and even like Remember had decent amount of influence with that, with Scandinavian music, like Nickel Harpo. But so I wanted to just focus on the traditional folk music, but I wanted to do it. I didn't want to just be a person here in the United States, just this is my take on Nordic music. It's like I wanted to learn the meters. I wanted to make the most authentic sounding music that I could, because I didn't want to put out something that was just like, oh, this is the Americanized version of that. It's like, no, I want them to, if it was played in a dance hall, I would look, somebody could dance to a Holling or a Gangar.
Yep.
And I would be thrilled.
And you finally got that wish at Golden. So we recently had the main reason, one of the main reasons Chris is in Colorado right now is because he was invited to perform and give a lecture at the Golden Midsummer Festival that happens in Golden, Colorado. If you like Coors, it's where Coors is from. And I remember before the festival, you were telling me, all I want is someone to dance to one of my tunes. It's all I want. And when I got there after it had happened, you were just glowing. You were like, life complete. I'm fine now. I'm happy. This is what it feels like to be happy. And so that was really, I love that I got to sort of like kind of witness the place, at least, in which that came full circle for you.
That was
and I will say it's also brave of you to just dive right into Nordic music like that, like traditional Nordic music, because that is intimidating as hell. If you were not Scandinavian, getting into all those dance forms, the weird meters, the accents, the tunings, it's not. This is coming from someone who also plays Irish music. Like, it is not like getting into Irish music. It's not like getting into English or even Appalachian or bluegrass. It's just like it's its own language of fiddling that is so different from what most Western Europeans or most North Americans are used to with their fiddling. And so for you to just like go right into like the black and white scratchy records and just be like, all right, let's do this. Like that's passion and dedication that usually scares a lot of people away. Yeah.
I love the vibrantness of the Scandinavian folk music. yeah, there's a lot of darker music even within the traditional folk music. I mean, you got your murder ballads, songs about the devil, people dancing themselves to death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I guess there's kind of like this contradiction to where it's like, we have this really lovely, upbeat music, but we're just gonna be dark.
Yep.
Especially when the lyrics come up, it's like, dang, those are some dark lyrics.
Yep.
But yeah, it was just me having a fascination with all these traditional instruments and wanting to play them in a traditional manner, because to me there's just no other music like traditional Scandinavian folk music.
Yeah, I mean, and you're also talking to a biased crowd right here. Like, literally, I agree with you. I love it. It's just something about it. Is as someone who plays traditional music from the British Isles and from the United States, it's just like there's just something about it that just it's so different, it's so characteristic, and so I understand the calling. Yep.
One of the things I did want to touch on is because when I started working on farm, this is important to how I kind of went back to folk music.
Okay.
Is prior to working a farm, I was like punk rock and black metal.
Yep.
That was my thing. And so when I worked on farms, I was introduced. I got bluegrass was something that I liked, but I didn't really listen to it that much. Country music was something I didn't like. I found an appreciation for country music because it made sense.
Yep.
And I think why Scandinavian folk music is so important to me, and all these instruments, is because of the farming tradition that Scandinavia has. A lot of these instruments, especially like the bukahorn, even like the cooling singing, they're all from like the farming areas.
Yep.
And some of these instruments were used not only as instruments, but also like there's a history of communication with each other through them.
Yep.
And so the whole farming thing and the country music was really, I just started going back and I was like, I need to explore these older styles of music, and because they were born from a lot of the farming culture in the areas. So
yeah, I mean, like that was the main reason why the video I did and the lecture that you went to at the festivals, Troll Magic and Nordic Fiddling, has just been such a big thing for me as a way to sort of associate my love of traditional music also with something that feels like a little bit deeper, more meaningful to me. It's not just that the music is pretty. It's not just that the music is inspiring. It's also like there's something deeper to it that draws us to it. You in particular, I worked on a farm for one summer, so I'll never say I'm a farmer. I'll never say I have the experience. But to me, instead, it's just been all that knowing that there are like little creatures hiding in plain sight. That you got to make a proper offering to the Nissa, or else he'll wreck up your house, or something will go missing that you love. The whole thing that like music tradition has this connection to real world stuff, like spirits who help you on the farm, or your own farming that you're doing yourself. It's just a side of folk music that I'm really happy to talk to you about, because it's a part that doesn't get talked about enough, because people often will write off fiddling or folk music as like grandpa music. And I feel like a change of heart's right around the corner, or maybe I'm just saying that because I'm trying to manifest it myself. But it's definitely worth talking about, especially with two younger guys like us. Actually talking about a style of music that, especially if you go to Scandinavian dances, we're the youngest ones there by like 40 years. So it's definitely it's something important to maybe try and like cultivate or foster a better relationship with the people. That's why I put the effort into trying to get neo-pagans or the esoteric folks to like sort of pay attention to those more mystical sides of this music. And then even the way you're talking about it, if you love the land, if you love farming, this is a farming music tradition, and it's just it's very, very important. I'm glad I'm getting to talk to you about this. So, Bli Med Meg Til Dansen was an awesome album if it wasn't a complete left turn from what you were typically doing. And it showed a very sudden and strong, at least from the outside looking in, it was a very sudden but very genuine turn towards traditional music. And this turns me to, I guess, like the last big topic, because it's a big one on this channel, is the toggle harpa.
Yeah.
You are, without a doubt, the most talented toggle harpa player that I know personally and that I listen to, that's like sort of in the same music scene. I know there are incredible toggle harpa players like Per Rudberg, but like at least in our immediate circle of like, you know, this new generation, like you play it, and this is how this ties into the traditional conversation. You play it like a fiddle. You play it like it's a traditional instrument. And I know, Daniel, if you're watching, you know I get a lot of mileage out of this comment of yours. The same 3 goddamn notes played over and over again.
Yes.
Gets old.
Yes,
and,
it does.
And Daniel is someone who I very much put you in the same camp with, of people in our age group who, or our generation, I guess would be a better way to put that, who are not looking at the toggle harpa as flavor to sound like Vardruna, but instead you guys are looking at this instrument like, this thing can do a lot. And when you rip that thing like a fiddle, it's like nothing else. So where I'm getting at in terms of a question here to set you up to talk about your experience with it, at what point did you realize the potential that the toggle harpa had outside of those same 3 goddamn notes? You know, what I'm getting at here is like, it's one thing to sort of like have a laugh at the people who do sort of use the toggle harpa more as a flavor,
mm-hmm.
or a MIDI file paintbrush on whatever they're doing to make it sound more Nordic or like Vardruna. I think it's much more productive to sort of talk about how to get out of that rut. I will call it a rut, and using this instrument, that if you have it, you spend good money on it, so you might as well learn how to play it, right? So in a spirit of being more productive, of, you know, how did you go about sort of breaking out of that mold or that rut of those same 3 goddamn notes? How did you go about like actually sort of expanding your repertoire and practicing techniques and all of that? Was it primarily listening to traditional Yuhiko players, for instance?
It was,
or,
yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah, Pekko Kapi, Rauno Nienemann, Per Rudberg, you know, they're all playing all these traditional tunes, and I got so tired of wah, 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 wah. Yeah, and
you forgot the second half.
Yeah, it just kind of drove me nuts, and so I was like, this instrument has such a like wide range of voices, and I really wanted to get more into the traditional style of playing, especially like the Finnish Grillian style playing.
Yep,
it's just Finns play it very differently, even from like the Swedish people. It's just different style of music, and it is like a different instrument. Like, you know, yohiko is technically a different instrument than like toggle harpa, whatever. But you know, you can tune them the same if you want to. But yeah, I just got fascinated with just like because the toggle harpa, the technique is all in the wrist.
Yep,
that's where it, and how, you know, how fast you can play various notes on the strings. So I remember the guy who made my first toggle harpa, he's like, yeah, when you're playing, try to, you know, get in as many notes as you can to like the bow stroke. Pay attention to how you're bowing, because it is really a very finicky instrument when it comes to like bowing. If like the stroke goes off, like even like a beat, it can totally mess up the entire song. It's hard to come back from it. If you're on like a downstroke and you go to like an upstroke, it's very, I was like, it's like a reboot.
And that's where it's actually very similar to like classical string playing, where the reason the up bow and down bow is written into the music is because if you start suddenly, this is coming from a classical basis, like if you get those reversed, all of a sudden like certain techniques won't work. It's not doing the same thing. It'll really mess you up. So yeah, that paying attention to that wrist technique is definitely important, and at least would help me pick up the tall harpa faster than someone typically would. But I just haven't had the time to like put into it. But like knowing how to work the wrist is such a huge part of any bowed string instrument, really. But it shouldn't be underestimated with the tall harpa.
No, because especially when you start expanding into like, you know, the 4 strings on there, you can pretty much play fiddle music on toggle harpa.
And if you're interested in that, check out Per Rudberg's YouTube channel, because he does straight up polskas and cricket. You want to say something about Per Rudberg?
He's awesome.
Yeah, he's like, he's awesome. Is there anything else to say? He's been so well behaved this whole time. He just had that one thing to say. So yeah, so Peter Lindbergh like takes full on like polskas and just plays them on toggle harpa the way you would hear a fiddler play it. It's like it's incredible to listen to. I remember watching him do that in his videos. Like, what?
Yeah.
How was he doing that? Some of his toggle harpas have like 4 or 5 strings on them.
Yeah,
It's insane. And I love the way you're saying is sort of like, if you do want to break out of that rut like you did and sort of like start exploring the instrument as the instrument it is, it requires 2 things. It requires going out of your comfort zone and listening to new music, traditional yuhiko, traditional toggle harpa players. That's the first hard step. But the harder step, and this might come off as very sassy, it takes practice. And a lot of us don't want to spend much time practicing. We want to spend a lot of time playing or like writing music or creating music. But I will say, to actually learn those techniques that go into both left hand and right hand playing of the toggle harpa, you actually have to do some practice, do some training to actually learn the bow strokes.
Yes.
And it's not easy to say like, oh, let's say I only have this much time to play this week. Do I want to practice bow strokes? No, I want to play a song, dude.
Yeah.
So, it is what it boils down to is discipline in a lot of ways. Listen to new music that actually uses the instrument in a traditional way that's, again, I'm just allowing myself to be sassy here in a way that's interesting. And then also putting the time into practice, which is maybe not sounding great, like when you were learning the buka horn. Actually taking that time to go somewhere, let yourself sound like garbage is actually very difficult for a lot of musicians. Myself included, I'm not above any of this.
Yeah.
When I actually have to practice something, I go, God damn it, I didn't want to practice today.
And that is a very common thing that I see with people picking up the toggle harpa. It's like, I guess in a lot of people's minds, they have this idea that they can pick it up and they're going to get a great sound out of it. I see the comments so many times of, this sounds like garbage, like, why can't I play it? It's like, it's a very finicky instrument. Like, I sounded like a dying cat when I first started playing.
It's not great.
But it's like, once you find that sweet spot of the pressure, it's like, and this is kind of a thing for toggle harpa players, it's like, keep at it, because you will get past that scratchy
and it's
sound.
worth it.
Yes.
It's worth it getting out of there. But the thing is, even when you're good, like even if you listen to Peter Lindbergh, sometimes it scratches. Sometimes it shrieks, because it's a very primitive instrument. And the more primitive an instrument, the less technology that mediates between you and the sound, the more things that can go wrong, because it's just you out there with that tall harpa. And if the horsehair doesn't want to connect properly with the bow hair, it's not going to, no matter how much you practice. All the technology into modern violins and all of that is to, a very sophisticated instrument is to reduce user error in a lot of ways. But I think like the biggest reason I'm really, sort of cordoning off this much time to talk about the toggle harpa is because it's the most popular instrument in this genre. Yeah, totally. By far. Yeah. I don't think that's changing anytime soon. But for new musicians who want to get started in this genre that needs new musicians, I think it's really important to understand that if you want to stand out and you want to do something meaningful, you've got to put the time into practicing a tall harpa just like you would have to practice any other instrument. A great example of this, I had him on a few episodes ago, Vizzy Bloodaxe. The amount of time he clearly puts into learning all those instruments he plays is what makes him stand out in a lot of ways. And whenever you post a reel on Instagram of you playing toggle harpa, I know I'm in for a treat. I'm going to hear something new today. And especially, just to sort of, I guess, round this off with Shuga Heston, which is your recent EP you did of just straight up unadulterated tall harpa. Yeah. I think it's just a great, well, I don't want to fluff you up too much and say it's a masterclass in original tall harpa playing, at least in the context of dark folk and dark folk musicians. It's at the very least, I think, a really nice primer for people to listen to. Like, if you want to hear what that instrument can do, if you dedicate the time to listening to the tradition and practicing your actual technique, which is easier said than done, you'd be really amazed what you can do with those things. And that's what you demonstrate with Shuga Heston.
Yeah, I think Shuga Heston's definitely the album where I thought it was a good blend of darker folk and also more traditional style playing. Because I took songs from Galder and even like songs I hadn't even recorded yet, and put them on to that. I don't want to call it an album.
Yeah, I know.
I'm kind of like, is it an album?
I think it's like an EP.
Yeah, it's just
a demo.
It was a showcase.
It's nice. I think it's a nice toggle harp demo.
Yeah,
but we're in a day and age where a demo can have the same production value as like a full scale album. Like back in the '80s, it was a bigger difference between an EP and an LP. But nowadays, it's just like they sound the same. It's about length.
Yeah, it totally is.
So, I mean, man. I mean, like that's really all I've really wanted to talk to you for the channel. I very easily see you coming back in the future to sort of continue more questions. Because we definitely kind of scratched the surface here with, especially in digging more into the perspective of Americans getting into both traditional and the dark folk side of things. But Chris, you don't do many interviews, and I'm very flattered that you've come onto the. I'm very flattered you've come onto the Nordic Sound Channel, even with an audience. Cricket's been sitting there judging your performance the whole time, and I think that he thinks you've done great. You got it, buddy.
Just the bird.
Yeah, he's actually been your cheering section this whole time. He's sort of been cheering you on. Oh, that's great. But Chris, no, seriously, it's been really awesome not only having you on the channel, but it's been awesome having you in Colorado for the last couple weeks. Looking forward to being a Cascadian Midsummer with you this weekend. It's gonna be such a good time. But if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
They can find me on Facebook's dying. I hardly
it's all advertisements.
I hardly use that Facebook page anymore. I'm not much. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram. Every now and then I get like a little kick to do some promotional stuff. But that's very rare. I'm not a very promotional person.
It takes a lot.
Yeah.
I know you're not, but when you do post little videos of you playing on your very picturesque Appalachian porch, it is very worth following you at Sun and Moon Dance, or your personal is Spirit Saddle with a little underscore between Spirit and Saddle. But yeah, man, so it's been great. And so for patrons, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Nordic Sound Channel, to stick around for the Q&A section. That is the new exclusive thing for patrons. We're going to dive into some more targeted questions from people who really want to learn more about you. Right. So, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the channel. We'll have you on another time. Let's go eat some ribs. Yep.
Southern meal.